I thought that I was surrounded by honest people who could be trusted 100%. But what was my disappointment when almost everyone betrayed me at one moment? My best friend started manipulating me, and my wife cheated on me with that very best friend. All I wanted was retribution. "Damn, I hate dealing with domestics," I complained to my partner Jax as we parked in front of the apartment complex. "Same here, man. Let's just get this over with," he replied. In my 23 years on the police force, almost every domestic disturbance I've handled has ended quietly, after a lot of yelling, threats, and sometimes fists, but rarely with any arrests. By the time the police are called, an argument between spouses has usually escalated to a pretty tense situation. But when we arrive, the combatants typically come to their senses and calm down. I suspect the dark blue uniforms and the guns might have something to do with it. However, every now and then things go wrong, and we end up being the bad guys to the fighting couple. I've been punched, shoved, and bitten during domestics before. I'd almost prefer facing a gangbanger with a weapon. When we reached the couple's apartment door, a tall, pretty woman with a dark red bruise on her face let us in. She told us her boyfriend was in the kitchen, so I left my partner of 15 years, Walter Jackson, with the woman while I cautiously approached him. The man was standing with the refrigerator door open, drinking beer, and looked somewhat stunned. He had a wound on his face. We were talking quietly for a minute or two when I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my right deltoid muscle and almost simultaneously heard the sound of a gunshot. I looked back and saw a woman holding a small pistol in her hands, preparing to fire again. At that moment, a second shot rang out, and the woman collapsed to the floor. "Are you two okay?" Jack shouted as he approached. "Oh shit, you've been hit!" I reached for my shoulder with my other hand. "Damn it, shit, damn it," I muttered. 23 years in the police, and the first bullet I got was on a house call. My arm was throbbing, but since it hurt less than when I broke it, I hoped the bone wasn't too badly damaged, if there was one at all. The boyfriend fetched me a clean towel from a drawer, while Jax moved around the woman's dead body and called it in. By the time the paramedics arrived for me, the boyfriend and I were seated at the kitchen table, and I had completed all the preliminary tasks for the call. As the paramedics stabilized me for the trip to the emergency room, Jax came over to check on me. With everything that had happened, I had to admit my adrenaline was through the roof, and I was incredibly thankful that Jax had saved my life. "Oh my God, Jax. Am I glad you got her before she put a second bullet in me," I said. "You saved my ass, buddy. I owe you big time. Anything you ever need, I'm your man." Although Jax ended up saving my life, he received a 3-day suspension for causing the situation in the first place. It appears he let the girlfriend go to the bathroom unescorted soon after we arrived at the scene, and she sneaked out carrying a .22 pistol. It took about 2 months for me to return to active duty since the small caliber bullet only grazed a bone. But when I got back, Jax was no longer my partner. He retired with his pension after 25 years on the job. I tried to talk him out of it, but he said he was fed up with all the nonsense and was done being a police officer. Damn. He was not only a great partner, but also a close personal friend. 2 months later, he moved to California to become a writer. It was always a significant event when best-selling author Walter Jackson returned to town for a visit. One of the local television stations always wanted to catch up with their favorite son, and no matter where he went, people would approach him for an autograph, often holding one of his books for him to sign. It was a pretty big deal for my wife, Tracy, and me as well. Jax always stayed with us during his week-long visits, and I would typically take some vacation days so we could spend time together, reminisce, and have a few drinks. Both Tracy and I had known Jax long before we became partners on the Metro Police Department. In fact, the three of us had been friends since we were about 5 years old and lived on the same block. We were practically the three musketeers. If you saw one of us, the other two were likely nearby. Tracy was a bit of a tomboy, so she joined us in playing baseball and army, while the other girls in the neighborhood were off playing with dolls and dressing up. Things got a little strange when we hit puberty. Tracy developed breasts, and her small bony butt suddenly filled out her jeans and shorts. Her mother thought it was inappropriate, so she had to stop playing football with the neighborhood boys. Before long, she started spending much more time with the other girls, huddling together, whispering and giggling. It got even stranger for me when I found out that Jax had asked Tracy to be his date for the 8th grade Valentine's dance. For several weeks leading up to the event, they were doing a lot of whispering and giggling. Then I caught them kissing by Jax's locker in the school hallway. Suddenly, I was the odd one out. We were no longer the 3 musketeers. Now it was 2 musketeers and an outsider. My feelings took a huge hit, especially when they continued to be a couple after the dance. The 2 of them continued to date for the remainder of 8th grade and most of 9th grade until Jax made the biggest mistake of his life. He was caught kissing Mary Lou Reagan under the bleachers that spring. The news spread throughout Robert Frost High School by the end of the next day, and suddenly, Tracy was single. I went from being nearly an outcast to becoming her comforting friend in just one day. Perhaps it could be said that I lacked pride. But I stepped in to take Jax's place in Tracy's heart in an instant. I never interfered in their relationship. But I wasn't going to hesitate for a second to claim the prize that was Tracy Watson. Within a week, she was my girlfriend, and I didn't feel guilty about it at all. When Jax's fling with Mary Lou ended a month later, he tried to convince Tracy to come back to him, even though he knew she was with me. That was the only time Jax and I fought during our years of friendship. As for Tracy, she told him she was with me and had no interest in him anymore. After a couple of weeks, he seemed to accept her decision. Over the next 6 months, he gradually worked his way back into our circle of friends. Jax was my best man when Tracy and I got married 6 months after we graduated from Michigan State University. He had already been on the police force for 2 years when I joined right after graduation. 8 years later, I became a sergeant, and he a detective, and we were paired up as partners. I considered it a great partnership. Unfortunately for Jax, his relationships with women didn't last as long as our partnership. His first marriage lasted only 3 years, and his second just 5. Both ended because he cheated. You know me, Rain, I love variety. Just being with one woman gets kind of old after a while, he once told me while we were driving around town. Tracy's a wonderful woman, but I don't know how you've done it. Just one woman. Wow. Despite his inability to maintain a relationship, Jax remained a good friend to both of us, and a great uncle to our 2 children. He was always invited to our home for holidays and birthdays, and he often vacationed with us during the years he was single. We were all sad to see Jax move to California, and we always looked forward to his visits back. The kids in particular were happy when he visited, because he always brought great gifts, especially after he became a successful author. During the initial 2 days of his arrival at our house, Jax appeared somewhat reserved. I decided to give him some space, hoping he would approach me when he was ready to talk. The moment I knew something was wrong was when he addressed me by my first name, Mason, signaling that we needed to have a serious conversation. Do you recall the incident when I intervened in a domestic dispute, potentially saving your life? He asked quietly one evening as we sat together in the family room, with Tracy preparing dinner in the kitchen. How could I forget? You bring it up every time you visit us, or we visit you, I replied, chuckling at our recurring joke. Well, I need to cash in on that favor you owe me, he said, leaning closer to me from his chair. I'm dying, Mason. It's real. The doctor says I have about a year left. There's an inoperable tumor in my brain. I scrutinized his gaze intently. Jax had a knack for jesting, but the sincerity in his eyes assured me he wasn't leading me into a trap. What assistance do you require from me? I inquired with the utmost seriousness I'd ever conveyed to anyone. I aim to embark on a final journey around the globe, ticking off items from my bucket list, and I intend to document it in a final book. I wish to have Tracy accompany me, sharing in my adventures and assisting with transcription, he explained. Hold on a second. It sounded like he was requesting permission to take my wife on one last global excursion before he passed away. Surely he couldn't be serious. Remember when you said anything you need? I'm your man? He reminded me. My head swam. My stomach churned as if I'd been sucker punched. Are you serious? I murmured. I never pledged my wife to you. It's not something I could or would do. I've already spoken with her, Rain. She understands what this means to me and she's agreed, Jack said, his tone quiet but resolute. No, absolutely not. I don't care what she said. You're not taking her with you. I might have promised you anything, but that doesn't extend to anyone, I insisted. This is absurd. But you made a promise to me, Jax protested. After I saved your life, you said you'd grant me anything I asked for. I know this is a big request, but I only have a year left. After that, I'll be gone, and she can be yours forever. Did you even listen to yourself? I promised you anything, not anyone. I'm not handing over my wife for a year, no matter the circumstances. I'm sorry you're dying, but I won't sacrifice my wife for you. Or anyone else, I said, my voice growing louder. You made a promise to him, Rain, no matter how you try to justify it. And since he's dying, I intend to honor that promise, Tracy interjected, standing in the doorway with her hands on her hips. I met the furious gaze of my wife. This was never going to happen. I never imagined he'd ask me to give you up for a year. This is beyond anything I could have foreseen. But I never made any promises to him about anyone, I argued with Tracy. I won't allow you to do it. You don't control me. I'm leaving. Tracy practically shouted at me before storming out of the room. Why did you save my life if you were planning to ruin it later? I asked Jax. I'm not ruining your life, Rain, he replied. I've always loved Tracy. I should never have let her go all those years ago. She deserves to share my final adventure. You know I'd treat her well. And then with me gone, she'd be all yours again. Completely. I can't agree to that, Jax. I won't give you my wife for a year, even if you'll be gone afterward. If you weren't dying and had asked me that, I'd kill you, I snarled. You know me better than anyone, Jax. Why would you even think I'd allow you to borrow Tracy for a year? Because you know me better than anyone, Rain. You know I'd take care of her and respect her. I'd never force her into anything degrading or against her will. Then I'd be gone. Forever. And you wouldn't have to worry about me coming back for her in the future, he said in a more businesslike manner than I expected, though his tone wouldn't sway my decision in any way. I suggested to Jax, with your finances, why not consider hiring a high-end escort or a lesser-known celebrity? Jax responded firmly, You're missing the point, Rain. I'm dying. This is my last chance. I want to make it count. He continued, I regret not pursuing Tracy years ago. She's always been the one for me, and she's open to it. Let me have this final request. I understand it's a big ask, but it would remain strictly between Tracy, you, and me. No one else would ever know. I would know, Jax. That's not who I am. I care for you like a brother, but I can't share my wife. Jax countered, Hey, bro, I'm not sure you're calling the shots here. I realized I wasn't in control of the situation, but I hoped Tracy would understand my perspective once we had a chance to talk. Despite feeling uneasy about Tracy and Jax talking behind my back, I believe she would be reasonable, right? About 10 minutes later, Tracy declared dinner was served. She and Jax enjoyed their meal and were cheerful company, seemingly for my sake, while I felt like I was facing imminent doom. They bantered throughout the evening as I feigned interest in the television. Despite Jax's attempts to involve me in their conversation, I remained focused on my despondency. Around 9 p.m., Tracy hinted that it was time for us to talk by announcing her readiness for bed. When I entered the room, Tracy was lying in bed. Nevertheless, her gesture when she patted the mattress indicated her intention to convince me in her own way. Preferring to maintain my posture, I stayed dressed and sat down on the nearest chair. "Nice try, baby, but I'm solving this with my intellect," I remarked. She grumbled, but paused for a moment before speaking urgently. "He's dying, Rain. Our oldest friend. He's dying. I have to do this," Tracy said, staring at him defiantly. "Are you going to do this alone?" I objected. "Shouldn't this be a decision we make together as a couple?" I asked. "This is my body, my decision," she stated in a firm tone. "Our vows, Tracy," I said. "The oaths you knowingly break belong to us. Doesn't that justify my involvement?" Her cheeks flushed, acknowledging the weight of my arguments, and she looked away, admitting that she hadn't expected such a confrontation. "I've never been unfaithful to you, Rain. I've never even thought about it. But this situation is different. He's dying, and he's our oldest friend. It wouldn't be about love. It would be me offering my body to provide comfort to our oldest friend in his final months," she explained. "So now you're Florence Nightingale. Literally." "That's pathetic, babe," I shouted. "Are you planning to sleep with every dying friend from now on?" She snarled at me, then took a deep breath and continued. "I can offer him comfort and assist him with his last book. I'm going to do this, whether you agree or not. We can discuss it later, after he's gone," she declared. That was exactly what I expected. There was no room for debate. She had made the decision for both of us. All that remained were the tears. "I inquired about the children," I said. "What about them?" "They don't need to know anything except that I'm assisting Uncle Jax," she replied sharply. "Are you kidding me?" I exclaimed. "Our kids aren't naive. They'll perceive me as weak for letting their mother gallivant around the world with our closest friend. It's disrespectful enough that you're doing this. I won't let them think I'm a doormat. I'll tell them the truth and let them make sense of it." "You can't do that. They'll think I'm promiscuous." "What would you call a woman who embarks on a year-long journey with a man who isn't her husband?" I questioned. "But it's different. He's terminally ill. I'd be providing comfort," she argued. "Call it what you want. If you go through with this, I'll call you promiscuous, plain and simple," I stated. "You did promise him anything," she reminded. "Nice try. I promised him anything, not anyone," I retorted. "But it seems like you two have discussed this extensively. And I'm left out of the loop." "Do what you feel you must, but remember there are consequences to actions," I concluded. The following day, I made another attempt with Jax. "Dude, we've been pals for 5 decades. Don't put me in this position with Tracy," I pleaded. "It'll be fine, Rain. She doesn't have the same feelings for me as she does for you," Jax reassured. "You're her husband. I'm just a friend. She sees me as a good friend, but her love for me is nowhere near what she feels for you. She'll return to you completely. I'll fade into a memory. Hopefully a fond one, but merely a memory." "But what if I'm not here when she comes back?" I questioned. "You wouldn't be foolish enough to abandon her when she returns?" Jax replied without hesitation. "You adore her. You two have been married forever. This won't last long. I'll be gone. Dead. And she'll be yours again. Just grant me this, Rain. Please." I shook my head, rose from my seat, and walked away. That evening, just as we began our dinner, she launched into me at the table, with Jax seated right there. It seemed she thought that since I wasn't going to be swayed by her persuasion, they could team up on me during the argument. "There's no divorce happening, Rain," Tracy asserted. "You love me, and deep down you know it. I love you, and you know that too. Plus, Jax is our oldest friend, and he's terminally ill. We're doing this for him." "I can't commit to that, Tracy. I'm not in agreement with this, not in the slightest," I countered. Over the next 2 days, we had several more debates like that. Then, on the 3rd day, a limousine pulled up in our driveway, and both Jax and Tracy descended the stairs with 2 suitcases each. I didn't offer to help with their luggage. So this is the plan, huh? I inquired. My wife and my supposed best friend gallivanting around the globe, playing house, while I'm left here to play the role of the obedient cuckold husband. Perhaps if I'm fortunate, you'll meet your demise sooner than anticipated. Jax visibly flinched at my words. My wife shot me a glare. I never thought you could stoop so low and be so cruel, she exclaimed. And I never imagined you'd betray me, and you, a schemer, I retorted, shifting my gaze from Tracy to Jax. Tracy looked like she wanted to retort, but Jax intervened with a shake of his head. It doesn't need to be like this, Rain, Tracy pleaded. Yes, it does, I replied, barely audible. With that, she followed Jax out the door. Tracy and I had never parted without a goodbye kiss until then. Now she was departing for a year to fulfill various roles: wife, companion, seductress, secretary, caregiver, for my former best friend. And I didn't even receive a peck on the cheek. It was a stark reminder of my place in her life now. Do you remember the era of the war on illicit substances of the 1960s? Well, in case you haven't noticed, we didn't want that. Instead, the legislators decided to capitulate. Despite the legalization of more substances, crime related to prohibited substances persists. We were close to a large seizure of white powder, which would have stopped the trade in our area for a while. As a result, my workload increased dramatically the following week. Since no one was waiting for me at home, I could devote myself entirely to work, which saved me from thinking about Tracy and Jax leaving. It's been 5 days since they left, and I still haven't received any messages from my ex-wife. Admittedly, I didn't reach out to her either, but on the other hand, I wasn't the one who left. Hey, Dad, how's it going? My daughter Stella asked when she called me while I was watching TV that evening. Do you miss Mom yet? Not exactly, sweetheart. I don't miss your mom specifically, but I do miss having someone else around in the evenings. I'm thinking about getting a dog for company, I replied. Do you think she'll be away for a year? Do you think Uncle Jax has that much time? She inquired. At this stage, Uncle Jax's timeline doesn't concern me much, and his passing wouldn't alter the state of our marriage anyway. Wait, what? Are you talking about divorce? But Mom said you agreed to let her help Uncle Jax, Stella exclaimed. Really? Is that what she told you? I questioned. Come on, Stell. You know me better than that. I wouldn't allow your mom to gallivant off with Uncle Jax for even a few days, let alone a year. Do you think she's going to have an affair with him? I thought she was just going to assist him with his book and his medications, you know, like an assistant, she said. I was taken aback by how unaware my 32-year-old daughter seemed. He doesn't need your mom to babysit him and jot down his meds, Stell. Let's be realistic, I replied. For a solid 10 seconds, there was nothing but silence on the other end of the phone line until she finally whispered, Yeah, right. I'm sorry, Dad. Me too, baby. Me too, I murmured in response. 2 days later, my wife called, and it wasn't a cheerful catch-up chat. You bastard! You told our daughter that I'm promiscuous, she screamed at me through the phone. I'm managing fine, Tracy. I'm doing all right without you. I hope you're enjoying your trip, I retorted pointedly. I heard her take a deep breath. That was her tell when she was angry, but she knew she was at fault. How are you really? She asked, sounding frustrated. Are you eating properly, taking care of yourself? Thanks for the concern, but you know you couldn't care less about me, so what's got you so worked up? I inquired. You called me promiscuous to our daughter. How could you do that, Rain? She demanded. I didn't tell our daughter you were promiscuous, I clarified. I just told her the truth about what you were doing with Jax, after you definitely lied to her. I didn't lie, Tracy interjected. I just didn't tell her everything. A lie of omission is still a lie, Tracy, I reminded her. I anticipated the ensuing silence. I told Trace, while I won't broadcast your actions to the world, I won't lie for you either, especially to our kids. If you're feeling guilty, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Great, now you're my conscience as well as my husband, she retorted sarcastically. Well, I'm sure we can drop one of those titles fairly quickly, I shot back. We talked about this. No divorce, Tracy insisted. No, you talked. I listened. Not a discussion, I pointed out. I didn't hear any response or noise, so I assumed she hung up. That's one of the biggest drawbacks of cell phones, I thought. The following evening, I received an unexpected phone call from my ex-best friend. Initially, I debated ignoring it altogether upon seeing the caller ID, but I opted to answer and record the conversation instead. Come on, Rain, you know you didn't have to do that to Tracy, he began as soon as I picked up. Like you have any right to lecture me. You didn't have to steal my wife, I replied calmly, struggling to keep my anger in check. But since you did, she should have had the decency to tell Stella the truth. The whole truth, not some sanitized version to make herself look good. She's promiscuous, however you spin it, Jax, and you're the one who encouraged that behavior. I heard him let out a heavy sigh. What part of I'm dying don't you understand? I won't be around in a year, and you two will be cozying up on your sofa, probably forgetting about your old buddy, he said. I'm not stealing her. I'm just borrowing her for a while as I embark on a final bucket list trip around the world. Would you deny her that opportunity, especially since I know you can't afford it? He questioned. Yes, I would, because I'm selfish. She's my wife, and if I can't afford to take her on a trip around the world, she doesn't get to sell herself out for it, I retorted. When did you become such a self-righteous complainer? He shot back. Good night, Jax. 2 nights later, I received a text from my wife. It contained a picture of her in a revealing bikini, sporting a deep tan, and holding a frothy drink. After quickly scanning the accompanying message, I learned that she was enjoying her time on the beaches of Portugal and Spain. She mentioned she'd try to keep me updated on her great adventure. I couldn't help but think how generous of her. However, I chose not to reply. Apparently, she also messaged our kids because they both mentioned receiving photos from her during our phone calls the next day. At least Stella seemed a bit upset when we spoke. As a police officer, you encounter people from various professions, including many attorneys. Personally, I don't have as much of an issue with them as some do, though I do have a trove of attorney jokes. Attorneys, like journalists, are necessary but are best kept at a distance if possible. However, at that moment in my life, I needed a good attorney, so I reached out to my friend, the prosecuting attorney, and asked for a recommendation based on his own divorce experience. Twyla Karras must have been stunning in her prime, as she still exuded grace and allure in her early 60s. Clad in a sleek black sweater dress during our initial encounter, my attention couldn't help but stray towards her. However, I managed to avert my gaze from the captivating gold necklace adorning her neck, which flirted teasingly with the neckline of her attire. Her piercing steel blue eyes gleamed as she extended a firm handshake, welcoming me into her spacious office. Alex Middleton speaks highly of you, which earns you some points in my book, she remarked as she gestured towards a seat at her wooden table. How can I assist you? Determined not to succumb to any distractions, I focused solely on her intense gaze as I recounted my predicament. Sympathetic nods and attentive note-taking accompanied my narrative. Are there any children involved for either of you? She inquired. No, they're all grown and independent. It's just me now. Well, just me, I admitted, feeling a pang of self-awareness. I never anticipated anything like this. I loved her wholeheartedly. And she left with him. His illness doesn't absolve her of our vows. She's my wife, and I don't harbor an ounce of guilt. Our commitment to each other didn't come with a clause for dying friends, I stated firmly. I informed Ms. Karras of my urgency, to have Tracy served promptly. I could discern her contemplation as she gazed at me. She explained that without a specific location, serving Tracy would be arduous and costly. I need to conduct some inquiries, but I believe it's wise for you to adopt a more patient approach and let events unfold naturally. Legal proceedings cannot proceed while she's abroad, affording you ample time to serve her. In fact, I advise against it until her return home." I found her nonchalant demeanor perplexing, though her demeanor turned steely when she smiled, sending a shiver down my spine as she jotted notes on her pad. Meanwhile, the children and I received sporadic texts and photos from Tracy from various locations. I glanced at them but refrained from responding. I knew the kids had begun corresponding with her, but they kept their exchanges private, perhaps to spare my pain. While I felt betrayed, I understood that Tracy was still their mother, and maintaining contact was important for them. Naturally, I assumed Tracy's messages and photos were attempts to maintain our connection. However, her sending photos depicting her and Jax as a happy couple only fueled my resentment. Images of them embracing or her seated on his lap, smiling, did nothing to foster closeness or forgiveness on my part. I noticed a change in Tracy's choice of rings on her left hand, different from the engagement and wedding rings I had given her years ago. This realization dawned on me when I saw a photo of her and Jax together, where she held a flute of champagne. Enlarging the photo, I examined it closely and couldn't help but express my frustration loudly, though luckily neither Tracy nor Jax were present to witness it, sparing me potential legal trouble. Occasionally, Tracy or Jax would leave voicemails, reiterating their belief that Tracy's time with him was special, and she would come back to me once Jax was out of the picture. Far too late, I'd mutter to myself upon hearing those messages. One afternoon, my younger daughter, Lori, called me in tears while I was on duty. I was at a Dunkin' Donuts enjoying a cup of coffee and a couple of donuts when her call came through. Yeah, the stereotype about cops and donuts exists for a reason. Lori informed me that Uncle Jax's health had taken a noticeable turn for the worse, and Tracy had been reaching out to keep the girls updated and seek support, as her usual confidant was also the one threatening to divorce her cheating. Mom called to say Uncle Jax probably doesn't have much time left. They'll likely end their world tour soon and settle in a major city with good medical facilities, maybe somewhere offering hospice care, Lori cried. Mom was in tears. She asked if we could fly out to meet them when they choose a hospital. Uncle Jax will cover the cost of the tickets. We're basically his only family, you know. Once upon a time, babe, we were that close, but those days ended when your mother left with Jax. That you're talking about doesn't include me anymore, I replied. You can't be serious, Dad, Lori wailed. He's your best friend. You two have been friends forever. He's Mom's best friend too. You can't be that vindictive. Watch me, I said. You do know that Mom's been involved with Uncle Jax the entire trip, right? Yes, Dad. Stella told me shortly after they left. I suppose you told Stella, Lori said. And that doesn't bother you? Your mother being intimate with Uncle Jax? I choked out, my voice breaking. There was silence on the other end of the line, except for Lori softly crying. My wife, who is your mother, had an affair with my former best friend throughout the trip. Both she and he disrespected me because they wanted to, using the excuse he's dying to justify their actions. She never had my consent, nor my help, nor any arrangement to break our marriage vows. That's where the story ends. Wow, Dad. It's incredibly cruel, my daughter remarked. Naturally, I didn't accompany my daughters when Tracy contacted them a week later to tell them that Jax was hospitalized in Japan and had very little time left. 6 days later, Stella called me to inform me of his passing and that they would be returning to the United States within 2 days. Jax had already arranged for the funeral, and it was scheduled for 2 days after their return. I felt uncomfortable with my lawyer's nonchalant attitude towards the divorce process when I informed her about my wife's imminent return home. Do you believe in me, Rain? What is it? She asked. If so, then take my advice. Refrain from initiating divorce proceedings until the announcement of Jax's will. I don't need a penny of that bastard's money. I started to scream, but she cut me off. I understand, Rain, she replied calmly. But you want retribution, and I can help you with that. Do you trust me? I couldn't comprehend everything that was going on in this woman's sharp mind, but for some reason I trusted her. I suppose only time could reveal her intentions. I encountered the family at the airport. I embraced my daughters warmly, but when Tracy attempted to hug me, I halted her with a stiff arm. Oof, she uttered upon colliding with my hand. Rain, it's been over 11 months since we last saw each other. You can't be that distant, can you? She queried, tears welling in her eyes. I can be that distant. I witnessed my wife leave with another man, engaging in intimacy with him for about a year until his passing, I retorted sharply. Are you still fixated on that? She whimpered. It was merely a physical connection with a close friend. I didn't have feelings for him like I do for you. I was consoling him. He was dying, you bastard. You keep telling yourself that fantasy, I snapped back. The funeral and burial took place locally. As Jax had served in the police force for 25 years, his colleagues turned out in large numbers, and he received full burial honors. The local media covered the event extensively, with even a few national news crews present. Our police chief, Rob Guilford, found himself besieged by the press seeking a story. He turned to me, Jax's former partner, to handle the press and their requests. I declined outright and explained why. Only one other person on the force knew about my wife's betrayal, so Rob was nearly as shocked as I was when I revealed it. I'm truly sorry, Rain. I had no idea. I wouldn't have asked if I had known, Rob apologized. I understand, boss. It would mean a lot to me if you could keep this quiet for a while. I'll be filing for divorce very soon, I informed him. I'm surprised you haven't done so already, he remarked. And I'm also surprised you didn't take more drastic action against your ex-partner and your wife. I'm not one for that sort of thing, I assured him. But I also don't fancy the idea of prison showers. Ex-cops don't usually fare well inside, you know. As his former partner, the responsibility of delivering the eulogy fell upon me. My wife was understandably anxious, wondering what I might say. While I worked on my speech at home, Tracy hovered nearby, clearly uneasy. Don't fret, Trace, I won't expose you both for the deceitful individuals you've become, I stated bluntly. Not for him or for you, but for the sake of our colleagues. They shouldn't be entangled in your dubious actions. Though anger flickered in her eyes, Tracy realized it was best not to provoke me further and retreated. The gathering after the funeral took place at the local PAL club. Easel-mounted photographs of Jax adorned the room, showcasing moments from his police career and his later success as a writer and public figure. Tracy suggested using a photo she had taken of Jax while he was writing during their trip, but I firmly rejected the idea. Unless you've been gossiping about your escapades, only 2 colleagues know the truth about your dishonorable conduct, and they won't expose you out of respect for me. You betrayed me. I won't allow you to diminish me further, I asserted. Tracy and the girls were shocked when I informed her that she would be staying in our guest room upon our return home. A week after she left, I had relocated all her belongings from the master bedroom. Initially, they all objected, but their protests ceased when I threatened to leave them at a rest stop. I've been living alone for nearly a year now since my beloved wife left me for another man, I explained. My dear daughters visited for a few days, but mostly it's just been me. I've had the freedom to come and go as I please, living life on my terms. Meanwhile, you were off gallivanting around the globe. Welcome back to reality. How are we supposed to reconnect if we're not even sharing a bed? Tracy lamented. We need to rebuild what we had. You keep saying that, but after all this time you still don't understand that it was never going to happen, I replied. You destroyed our marriage by having an affair." "Uncle Jax was dying, Dad," Stella began, but I cut her off. "Have either of you told your husbands the truth about what your mother was doing during her year away from our marriage?" I asked pointedly. When I received no response, I pressed on. "Why not, ladies?" "Because you know your husbands wouldn't approve. Because there's no way either of them would let either of you do what your mother did. Why is it acceptable for my wife to behave like a girl of easy virtue but not for their wives?" We drove in silence for most of the remainder of the journey until I informed Tracy about the new sleeping arrangements. The daughters returned to their husbands a few days after Jax's funeral. The house became as quiet as it had been when I was alone. I had grown accustomed to the silence in my solitude, so I saw no reason to disrupt my routine now that Tracy was back home, especially since I'd nothing constructive to say to her. I continued to prepare my own meals and declined when Tracy cooked. "This is utterly absurd," she yelled 5 days later when I once again ignored her invitation to dinner. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said that a few times, too, after you left to enjoy your promiscuous world tour. And before you say it again, yes, I know he was dying. So what? It didn't give either of you the right to do what you did. It was just a flimsy excuse for you two to engage in open infidelity. Stop trying to justify it as something honorable. There was nothing honorable about you betraying me with Jax." I couldn't help but notice that Tracy had never apologized for her affair. She showed no remorse for her actions whatsoever. Could she truly be this delusional, this self-absorbed? Almost a year traveling the world with another man provided all the answers I needed. Jax, lacking close family and aware of his impending death, arranged his estate and prepared his will in advance. The reading was scheduled just 3 weeks after his funeral, with exclusive invitations extended only to my family members. I presumed that we, or at least Tracy and her daughters, would likely inherit the majority of his estate, which I estimated to be worth several $1,000,000. Despite my reluctance, I informed my lawyer that I had no intention of accepting any of his money, believing that Tracy had earned it through questionable means. Nevertheless, I was advised to attend the reading and refrain from speaking out, regardless of the outcome. "Promise me, Rain. Promise me you won't utter a single disparaging remark during the reading. Save any concerns for our meeting the following day," Twyla insisted. Reluctantly, I agreed, but only after some hesitation. The children returned home for the will reading, making our house bustling with spouses and grandchildren. Tracy suggested she move back into my bedroom to make room for the grandkids in the guest room, but I rejected that idea immediately. I wasn't going to let her use intimacy to manipulate her way back into my life. During the reading, I wasn't surprised to learn that Jax had left $1 million trust fund for each of my daughters. They saw him as an uncle, and he had always been generous to them over the years. He also donated $1 million to our community's United Way and another $1 million to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Tracy seemed eager with each announcement of smaller bequests, but I remained unaffected. The lawyer representing the estate then revealed that the next allocation included the remaining assets of Jax's estate, $8.4 million, and his residence near Sacramento. To my surprise, it was designated for me. Tracy expressed her joy with a squeal, while I sat at the conference table in a state of disbelief. Although I wanted to speak, I recalled the promise I had made to Twyla and opted to remain silent. Tracy attempted to embrace me but halted upon noticing my stern expression. The lawyer intervened, thrusting an envelope into my hand despite my attempt to resist. "You really ought to read this, Mr. Rainwater. It may alter your perspective on certain matters," he urged. The children enveloped me in hugs and tears, while my sons-in-law grinned broadly. Tracy beamed with delight. It all felt surreal, like a nightmare. Knowing I needed to address the situation, I invited everyone to dinner, courtesy of my newfound wealth. During the meal, I remained mostly quiet at the table, unsure if anyone truly cared to hear my thoughts. Nevertheless, everyone appeared content enough. The encounter with Twyla was truly enlightening. Just as Tracy had reacted the day prior, Twyla couldn't contain her excitement upon learning that Jax had left the majority of his fortune to me. "To you? Not both you and Tracy?" Twyla inquired, her tone suddenly grave. "Yes, just me. Does it really matter? What's mine is hers, and what's hers is mine, right?" I responded. "Not quite. Despite being married, the inheritance was specifically designated for you alone, meaning you, not you and your spouse, have full control over these funds," she explained. "Wait," I interjected. "So you're saying I get to decide, just me, what to do with this money?" "Exactly. And since you've expressed a desire not to keep it, you can donate it. But remember, you'll need to pay taxes on it first. Remember when I advised you to hold off on filing for divorce? This is why. You can give the money away. But if you had filed for divorce, it would have been considered marital property and divided equally. So, pay your taxes, make your donations, and then, 6 months down the line, proceed with the divorce. You'll still need to divide any remaining assets, but the inheritance will be out of the picture by then." "Does that sound like a plan?" Twyla asked, flashing a flirtatious smile. "Oh, and did you know there's a fund managed by a private group in the state that assists the widows and children of police officers killed in the line of duty?" "Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant," I exclaimed, genuinely impressed. "Yeah, and perhaps you should take a vacation of your own so nobody can locate you until you've served her. Sell the house, settle the taxes, and use that money to finance your getaway," she suggested. "How did you know he'd leave the majority to me, rather than to both of us?" I inquired. "I didn't, but it seemed like a logical assumption to me based on what you've told me about him. I figured he'd feel so guilty towards you that he'd leave the money solely to you as a gesture, assuming you'd split it with your wife in the divorce he anticipated," Twyla explained triumphantly. "He never imagined you'd have the wit or the patience to pull this off." I managed to accomplish it discreetly thanks to Twyla and a tax expert she recommended. A few weeks later, on my way back home from work, I spotted Tracy engrossed in her phone, tears streaming down her face as she scrolled through photos, seemingly consumed by sorrow. It wasn't surprising that she had amassed a collection of photos from her recent journey. She had regularly shared them with me and the girls over the past year. I feigned ignorance and headed upstairs to change, but a new idea began to take shape in my mind. My wife was glued to her phone like a teenager, rarely letting it out of her sight except when she showered each evening before bed. Hearing the water running that night, I seized the opportunity and snatched her phone from the guest room. To my surprise, it wasn't password protected. With a spiteful chuckle, I entered her photo app and deleted everything. A few minutes later, still amused by my actions, I wiped her trip photos from the cloud in the family room. Just as I finished, Tracy entered, her hair wrapped in a towel. I didn't bother to greet her. Our interactions were typically limited to exchanging information, despite her attempts at conversation. "What's amusing you, Rain?" she inquired. "Are you watching another episode of The Office?" "Cat memes," I replied, clicking on the screen I had concealed and enlarging it. I swiftly angled the screen towards her, then back to myself. I knew I was behaving childishly, but I felt deeply wronged. While I might not have erupted into a rage like some, emotional pain affects us all equally. Perhaps I should have anticipated it, but 2 nights later, I entered the house to find a storm brewing. "You despicable, vile creature," she yelled as I stepped into the house from the garage. "I can't believe you did that. All my photos, every single picture of Jax and me, tell me you've backed them up and hidden them somewhere, please." I looked at her tear-streaked, anguished face. It was as though Jax had died all over again. "You assured me that when he was gone, he wouldn't be a presence in our lives. Yet you constantly revisit his photos, reliving your past. I've seen every single one. That was much more than mere solace you were offering my former best friend, I retorted. But he's gone now. I can never retrieve those pictures, you vindictive bastard, she sobbed. I shrugged indifferently. Frankly, I didn't care. You don't have the authority to judge pettiness, I murmured. Tracy spent the following 2 days seething at me. I never turned my back on her, genuinely concerned for my safety. I made sure to lock my bedroom door whenever I wasn't present in the room. Tracy had a routine of doing grocery shopping on Saturday mornings. As she left, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, and neither of us had spoken a word all day. Shortly after she left, I called an Uber and brought down a large suitcase and a carry-on. I thought for a long time about what to write in the note I planned to leave for her, but in the end I couldn't find the right words except insults, so I decided not to leave any note at all. I figured she would realize later in the day when I didn't return home. She finally caught on around 9 p.m. That's when the first call came through. Upon turning my phone back on in Lisbon, Portugal, I discovered 3 more missed calls, including one each from my daughters. I listened to the messages but didn't return any of the calls. After all, I was on vacation. Knowing Tracy hadn't resumed work after her sabbatical, I anticipated she'd be home Monday morning when the process server arrived. Over the past 6 months, I had taken all the stereotypical divorce precautions like separating our finances and canceling our joint credit cards. That would provide her with more than enough to live on for about a year as long as she didn't make any rash purchases, like buying a Lamborghini. Twyla called me around 4 p.m. Lisbon time. At that moment, I was seated in a cozy cafe, savoring a dry red wine alongside 2 varieties of cheese when my phone rang. After exchanging pleasantries, Twyla mentioned, my server informed me that she didn't take the news well. Particularly, your filing for adultery seemed to unsettle her, despite its lack of impact on the settlement. The images of them engaged in adulterous activities really shook her up, according to my server. Did you send those photos to my daughters as we discussed and separately to my sons-in-law? I inquired. My daughter seemed to believe her affair with Jax was some sort of kindness. I wanted to ensure they saw the reality of her actions, and I wanted my sons-in-law to see what their wives consider compassionate. It should spark some interesting discussions in those households tonight. I followed my client's instructions precisely with the appropriate wording, Twyla assured. Thank you, I responded softly. I'm not proud of resorting to that, but I'm weary of being painted as the villain. She cheated, yet somehow I'm the one in the wrong. When I returned home after 8 weeks, I had a deep tan and felt refreshed. Tracy rushed into the kitchen but stopped short when she saw me. It wasn't the joyful reunion she had hoped for. You know, I really enjoyed Portugal and the south of France the most, I remarked. Although I might have enjoyed the entire trip more if I had brought along a companion like you did. She glared at me, wrinkling her nose in disdain. Are you done being self-absorbed? She snapped. Can we move past this and focus on us again? I'll do anything to make it right. Why would I want to go back to us? I retorted. Clearly, us wasn't working if you could just leave and be with someone else for nearly a year. He was dying. He was our friend. I had to be there for him, she protested, her voice rising. This argument is as tired as Jack's. Just because he was dying doesn't justify you being with him for a year without my consent. We made vows as husband and wife. You don't own me. I decide what to do with my body, she screeched. Wrong. We committed to each other exclusively when we exchanged vows, I insisted. She attempted to resist the divorce, eventually seeking legal representation. The initial action her lawyer took was to request a detailed record of all our combined and individual assets. It only took a day for her lawyer to reach out to Twyla and inquire about the whereabouts of the money Jax had bequeathed to me, my lawyer informed me. That money has been gone for months, Mr. Robertson. My client chose not to benefit from funds earned by his wife through illicit means, so after settling taxes, he made a donation to the State Police Widows and Orphans Fund. Twyla recounted. He can't simply do that, Tracy's attorney exclaimed. Those funds belong to both parties. He cannot spend them arbitrarily. In fact, both had access to their joint account at the time. But the crucial point is that the money was left directly to my client, not to both spouses jointly, Twyla clarified. I suppose she has the option to contest this, but considering it has been with the charity for over 6 months, she will come across as the real-life The Grinch who stole Christmas, Twyla remarked. The charity's legal team thoroughly reviewed the matter before accepting the donation, and we won't hesitate to involve the media. About an hour after Twyla informed me of her lawyer's inquiry regarding the money, my phone began ringing incessantly. I had been avoiding all attempts at communication since she embarked on her journey, and I saw no reason to alter my stance. After that, my children began calling, and despite knowing the purpose of the calls, I still picked up. Wow, Dad, you really gave away all of Uncle Jax's money. Seriously, Stella exclaimed over the phone. I certainly did, Stell, I replied cheerfully. The folks at the fund were ecstatic, and I believe Jax would have approved of the donation too. But, Dad, you know he would have wanted Mom to have a share of that money. He adored Mom, Stella lamented. And therein lies the dilemma, darling. He adored my wife, and she reciprocated. My wife. I suppose one can't help who they love, but when you love someone else's spouse, complications arise. And as for her, she should have only loved me. In that way. She crossed a boundary. Disrespected me. Why must I keep explaining this? I said. I had moved into an apartment a couple of days after returning from vacation, sensing that things would unravel as soon as she discovered I had spent Jax's money. It turned out to be a wise choice. After news spread about my donation, most of my friends in the police force thought I'd gone mad. I found myself frequently explaining my reasoning to them and others who inquired. It surprised me how many felt entitled to comment on my financial choices. Consequently, I withdrew socially. My life revolved around work and home. My daughters distanced themselves, upset over my actions against Tracy and Jax's money donation. However, my sons-in-law occasionally visited. Lori's husband, Grant, did so discreetly, while Stella's husband, Abel, openly supported me despite his strained marriage due to Stella defending Tracy's infidelity. One can't help but wonder when my turn will come, Dad, Abel confided during one of our beer nights on the deck. Stella must realize Mom's wrongdoing. I hope her support is merely a facade. One evening, Twyla dropped by with a bottle of Glenmorangie single malt and a 5,000-piece puzzle. Rain, I understand you're not officially divorced yet, but there are plenty of great women out there who would be interested in a good guy like you. You should consider putting yourself out there, so to speak. I'm not suggesting you go to the extremes your wife did, but since you initiated the divorce months ago, hardly anyone would blame you for seeking companionship, Twyla remarked. It's a shame you don't have the writing talent your late partner had, because this situation could make for a fascinating book. There are many details you're unaware of because your wife won't disclose them, but you have enough material to create a compelling fiction, supplemented by your imagination. Rain raised both eyebrows in understanding. Then he flashed a smile as he held up his phone. I'm privy to more information than she realizes. My ex liked to taunt me with occasional revelations, I revealed. There was a threesome in Greece and encounters with a couple of Maori cops in New Zealand. I have videos of both. And you never disclosed this to your lawyer? Twyla questioned, a hint of reproach in her tone. I knew we didn't require them to achieve our objectives, I replied, locking eyes with Twyla. But that doesn't mean I'm without flaws. I'm not ruling out their potential use in the future. This time, Twyla raised her eyebrows. I learn something new every time we meet, she remarked. The more I pondered it, the more I found myself embracing Twyla's suggestion of writing a book. With nothing much else happening in my life except work, I had the time for it. If Jax could manage it, and I knew he wasn't exactly a literary genius, Then surely I could too, especially since I already had the essence of the story laid out before me. Fast forward 2 months and I was officially liberated. I booked a table at my favorite restaurant and dialed Twyla, who was now no longer just my lawyer. "You remembered my number. How thoughtful," she remarked as she answered. "I assume this call is to mark your newfound freedom. You do know it's quite a common day for calls like this, right?" "I hadn't really thought about it, but it makes sense," I replied. "But how many of your former clients ask you out for dinner?" "I've got a reservation at Cyrano's tonight at 7. It's short notice, but I wanted to catch you before you could come up with a polite excuse." "But I won't have time to change into something suitable for a date," she protested. "I know you always dress impeccably for work," I countered. "I prefer something a bit less lawyerly for social outings," she explained. "I'm sure we can find something less lawyerly for drinks and dessert at my place afterward," I suggested. "In that case, how can I refuse?" she acquiesced. Aware that she would be dressed nicely, I opted for my dark blue suit for my first date in over 33 years. I couldn't shake the feeling of being a 16-year-old again, nervous for my first date with Emma Wysocki. Reflecting on that, I recalled throwing up about 15 minutes before I was supposed to pick her up. She had given me her address in the upscale part of town, which wasn't surprising given her successful career as an attorney, living independently since her divorce 15 years ago from an unfaithful spouse. What did surprise me was her attire when she answered the door. She wore a revealing maroon dress that stopped a few inches above her knees, accentuating her slender waist and gracefully moving with her. For the first time since I had known her, her auburn hair flowed freely past her shoulders. "Wow," I murmured quietly. "Perhaps not quiet enough." "I'll take that as a compliment then," she replied, her voice filled with delight. "I left work a bit early to get ready." I found myself momentarily flustered. I shamelessly looked her over as if she were a delicious meal and I was famished. When I realized she was watching me, I hoped I wasn't visibly drooling. "I understand, Rain," she said gently. "I know you're a bit out of practice. I promise to go easy on you tonight." I reached out to take her hand, and we set off. During her time as my lawyer, Twyla has shown qualities such as charm, a sense of humor, and high intelligence. That evening was unlike any I've experienced in a long time. It's not disdain for Tracy. It's just that Twyla and I had a deep connection. She brought something new into my life. We both ordered cheesecake, and I took her to my house. I made coffee and poured us both a glass of Bailey's. Rain, can I borrow that t-shirt?" Twyla asked quietly. "You know, this is not the kind of legal thing that I promised." "Of course," I replied, and started unbuttoning my white shirt. She took a shirt and disappeared into the bathroom for a few minutes. When she came out, the dress was slung over her arm, and she was holding high-heeled shoes in her hand. She was aware of the effect she was having on me as we sat together on my couch, sipping coffee and enjoying cheesecake. 5 minutes after the cheesecake was finished, we found ourselves locked in a passionate embrace on the sofa. It had been over 18 months since my last encounter with a woman, and I couldn't help but worry if I'd be up to par, especially for her. I understand that every woman is unique, so I tried to pay close attention to Twyla's preferences. I tried to make this intimacy unforgettable. Honestly, Twyla's responsiveness surpassed anyone I've been with before. 20 minutes later, Twyla mentioned that she had to go home to work in the morning, even though I had a late shift at 3 p.m. "I want you to know that I usually don't sleep with just anyone, and you're the first ex-client I've had," she confessed. "And if you're interested, I've learned something new again." Her words made me blush, hoping it was a compliment. "You're amazing." "Can we see each other again?" I asked, feeling a little vulnerable. "I would be disappointed if you didn't," she replied. "But I'll understand if you want to consider other options." "No, I don't want to. Why don't we see where this leads us? Everyone advises not to rush, but why can't I take my time with you? If I like chocolate ice cream, why should I try vanilla ice cream first before eating another portion of chocolate?" I suggested it. Yes, I did say that, much to my embarrassment. But she grinned and agreed. We set a date for next Saturday, my next day off. Writing a book was completely outside my usual realm, to the point of absurdity. Throughout my career, I had penned countless reports, but that was the extent of my writing background. Fiction was entirely uncharted territory for me. Police reports were strictly nonfiction, adhering to a just-the-facts approach. Style was non-existent, though grammar mattered. Luckily, I had immersed myself in fiction, devouring all 6 of Jax's books. If Jax could do it, I figured. One advantage I had over Jax was my direct experience with the story I was telling, or at least a significant portion of it. While I lacked Tracy's perspective, being fiction allowed me to embellish freely. I attempted to operate within moral boundaries, but after she turned my daughters against me, I realized it was time to shed my Mr. Nice Guy persona. This meant leveraging Tracy's own indiscretions against her. Recounting the parts of the story I lived through was anything but cathartic. It was painful. Often I'd write for mere minutes before succumbing to frustration, often resulting in broken coffee mugs. After demolishing the last of my 8 ceramic mugs, I resorted to a set of supposedly indestructible hard plastic ones from Walmart. Even then, I managed to destroy 6 of them before completing the first draft. To keep my sanity, I exaggerated the exploits of my promiscuous heroine. In addition to her affair with her dying partner during our journey around the world, I prepared a scenario for meetings with 24 other men, photos of whom Jax shared. Given my attitude towards Tracy, I doubt she knew about Jax sharing photos. But that's likely to change. I asked Twyla, my lawyer, to review my project. Lawyers, as a rule, have excellent command of the language and have a keen sense of decency. I relied on her opinion when it was necessary, especially when I was teetering on the edge of indecency. Her first concern was my decision to name the wrong character, Tracy, in the book. Although the truth can serve as a defense against accusations of defamation and slander, using my ex-wife's name for a character is fraught with legal problems and exposing my own experience. In fact, you publicly admit that you have been cuckolded, she warned. You kept your problems a secret while she cheated on you, but naming a character after her would make a difference. I basically did it to protect my children, but since they joined Tracy, I no longer feel obligated to protect them. Let everything take its course, I replied. After half a year of being with Twyla, I was certain she was the one I wanted to spend my life with, and she readily accepted when I proposed. Our intimate wedding took place 6 months later, and I moved into her home. Life carried on for both of us, but there was a twist. When I finished my book, I reached out to Jax's publisher, leveraging his name and our connection without hesitation. It seemed like the least my former friend could do for me. The publisher showed interest in my initial chapters and requested the entire manuscript for one of their in-house editors to review. After receiving 17,000 edits and rewriting 2 chapters from scratch, the editor was genuinely enthusiastic about endorsing the manuscript. I had Twyla Rainwater, now my house attorney, handle negotiations on my behalf, though in reality we accepted their initial offer due to my lack of leverage as a newcomer. My writing was labeled a bodice ripper in the industry, catering mostly to women over 40, as younger demographics seemed disinterested in books. Nonetheless, my book flew off the shelves in its initial limited printing, prompting the publisher to triple the print run for subsequent editions. I'm not going to pretend to be knowledgeable about the book industry, but the publishing company went ahead with 3 additional printings of my book over the next few months. It unexpectedly became a bestseller. Who would have thought? How did you find out about the threesome and the Maori guys, Rain? Tracy asked quietly when I picked up the phone a few months after the book was released. I know most of what you wrote was just sensationalism to attract readers, but you nailed 2 aspects perfectly, and I don't believe in coincidences. Who betrayed my trust? A myriad of thoughts raced through my mind in that moment. Being magnanimous wasn't one of them. Your partner. I replied bluntly. Idiot decided to send me videos of both incidents. He couldn't resist flaunting your infidelity in my face. Oh, God, no. I never intended for you to ever see that, she said. I'm sorry. I'm sure you are, I retorted. I never flaunted it in your face. Never showed the girls even when they defended you, but that's in the past. I'll tell them the truth, show them the videos when they ask, and they will. Is there anything I can do to convince you not to show the girls those videos? She pleaded. There was, but you weren't clever enough to do it in time. That ship has long sailed, I remarked. It took a week before my younger daughter called, and she was furious. Lori reprimanded me over the phone. I understand it's supposed to be fiction, Dad, but you knew when you wrote it that many would assume it's Mom, and you portrayed her as the worst. I expected more from you. Not all of it was made up, I replied. Some was inspired by real events. I know you might not want to hear it, so I'll just send you videos of 2 incidents. I'll wait for your apology. Then you can share those with your sister, and she can apologize too. After hanging up, I sent the 2 videos, totaling about 30 minutes. Roughly 35 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered immediately without checking the caller ID. I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't want to believe Mom could do that to you. Helping Uncle Jax was one thing, but this is different, she said, her voice remorseful. Actually, sweetheart, it wasn't just about her helping Uncle Jax. She cheated on me with him, and his illness wasn't a justification. She did it because she wanted to. That's the bottom line, I stated firmly. An hour later, I received the second apology, accompanied by tears. I wished it could have been different, but it was what it was. I didn't gain wealth directly from the sales of my book, but rather when a major movie studio acquired the rights to adapt it into a film. They provided me with a substantial sum, enough for me to retire immediately if I chose to, which I did. The only reason I continued working was because my divorce postponed my retirement from the police force for 3 years. About a year later, the movie was produced, and I received a generous payment for my role as a screenplay consultant. It took another 9 months for the movie to be released, and then things really took a turn for the worse. As Twyla explained to me, reading the words was one thing, but witnessing the actions was a completely different and much more distressing experience. My older daughter expressed, "Dad, was it really necessary to take it to that extent?" During our phone call. I gently corrected her. I believe we've had this discussion previously. It was your mother who took it to that extent. You're directing your frustration at the messenger. Again. Apologizing softly, she responded, "I'm sorry, Dad. It's just that you seem to have a great life with Twyla, while she doesn't have much." I reassured her. It's her decision, darling. Actions have consequences. She made the choice to leave for a year-long adventure around the world with a man who wasn't her husband. I loved her. I cautioned her. But she didn't love me enough to heed the warning. For some inexplicable reason, she believed she could have it all. But reality doesn't operate that way. She shattered my life. If it weren't for Twyla, my life would be in shambles. Your mother made her decision and discarded me. Discarded me. I refused to spend a single moment worrying about her fate. She made her bed. Why is she surprised it's unpleasant? The background music was becoming increasingly loud. Carnival in Rio de Janeiro is akin to Mardi Gras in New Orleans, but amplified. Twyla and I had resolved to embark on our own global journey. Apologies, sweetheart, but the noise is making it difficult to continue our conversation. Please convey my regards to everyone back home. We'll catch up later, I concluded.